When it comes to evil, society often pictures men, ruthless gangsters, serial predators, or war criminals. But every once in a while, a woman comes along who shatters that expectation completely. These aren't women who killed in self-defense or snapped in a moment of desperation. These are women who planned, stalked, manipulated, and murdered with zero remorse, some even smiling as they took lives. In this list, we're digging into the most evil women killers ever executed in the U.S. Women whose crimes were so disturbing, courts had no choice but to hand down the death penalty. Some of them killed their own children, others murdered strangers for profit, and a few did it just because they could. Their names may not be as widely known, but their crimes are unforgettable. Let's get into it. Velma Barfield. State of execution, North Carolina. Execution date, November 2nd, 1984. Velma Barfield, known in the media as the Death Row Granny, may have looked like someone's gentle grandmother, but her crimes were pure evil. Behind her church-going image and Southern manners was a woman who methodically poisoned people close to her. Between 1971 and 1978, Velma laced food and drinks with arsenic or other toxic substances, killing at least 6 people, 4 of whom were elderly patients she was paid to care for. Her killing spree began with her own mother, Lillian Bullard, who died after a sudden illness that was later linked to arsenic poisoning. Velma's second victim was her boyfriend, Jennings Barfield, who had grown suspicious of her financial habits. As authorities dug deeper, more bodies turned up. People who had trusted her, paid her, and even loved her. Each death had a signature pattern: quick illness followed by a swift and quiet funeral. Her motive was simple but cold, and it was money. Velma often forged checks and stole from her victims, using murder to cover up her financial crimes. What made her case so chilling was her calmness during the investigation. She showed little remorse, and even when she finally confessed, her tone remained matter-of-fact. She later claimed drug addiction clouded her actions, but the court didn't buy it. On November 2, 1984, Velma Barfield was executed by lethal injection at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. She was the first woman executed in the U.S. since 1962. In her final moments, she prayed and asked for forgiveness. But for many, especially the families of her victims, her sweet persona was just a mask, hiding one of the most cold-hearted killers the South had ever seen. Judy Buenoano. State of execution, Florida. Execution date, March 30th, 1998. Judy Buenoano was charming, calculated, and absolutely lethal. Dubbed the Black Widow, she murdered her husband, her disabled son, and at least one boyfriend, all for insurance money. Her crimes spanned over a decade, and the deeper investigators dug, the more bodies surfaced. With each death, Judy collected thousands of dollars in life insurance and moved on like nothing happened. Her killing spree began in 1971, when her husband James Goodyear, an Air Force sergeant, died suddenly after returning from Vietnam. Doctors initially thought it was natural causes until years later when the body was exhumed and arsenic was found in his system. In 1980, her paraplegic son Michael also died, but this time by drowning. Judy had taken him canoeing, and when the canoe mysteriously flipped, she made no effort to save him. She had recently taken out a hefty life insurance policy on him as well. Her boyfriend, John Gentry, became suspicious when he fell violently ill after taking vitamin pills Judy had given him. He survived, and police soon discovered she had spiked the capsules with arsenic. When they searched her home, they found wire, bomb-making materials, and more poison. The investigation linked her to at least 3 deaths, and she was eventually charged with murder, attempted murder, and grand theft. On March 30, 1998, Judy Buenoano was strapped into Florida's electric chair and executed. She showed no emotion, didn't offer a final statement, and left behind a trail of death and deception. Cold, quiet, and manipulative to the end, Judy proved that evil can wear a pleasant smile and still be ruthless beneath it. Aileen Wuornos. State of execution, Florida. Execution date, October 9th, 2002. Aileen Wuornos isn't just one of the most talked about women on death row. Her story flipped the narrative entirely. Between 1989 and 1990, she shot and killed 7 men along Florida highways. Aileen, who was a worker at the time, claimed she only pulled the trigger in self-defense. According to her, each of those men had tried to assault her, but the evidence didn't quite match up. Each victim had been shot multiple times, some even in the back, and their belongings, including their vehicles and wallets, had been taken. What the police saw wasn't a woman trying to survive, but it was a cold, calculated killer who knew how to cover her tracks. Her early life was nothing short of tragic. Abandoned by her parents and abused throughout her childhood, Aileen was basically forced into survival mode by her teens. She started hitchhiking, stealing, and engaging in work just to stay alive. She bounced around from state to state, often sleeping in the woods or under bridges. When she landed in Florida, things got worse. She met a woman named Tyria Moore, and they lived together in cheap motels. Aileen was supporting both of them by soliciting men off highways, and that's when the murders began. She used a .22 caliber pistol and didn't just kill quickly. She made sure her victims wouldn't get back up. Her arrest came in 1991 after police tracked down a stolen vehicle linked to one of her victims. Tyria, who had been Aileen's girlfriend and partner in day-to-day survival, ended up working with law enforcement. She convinced Aileen to confess over a recorded phone call. That betrayal, along with the pressure of the case, broke Aileen down. She was angry, paranoid, and openly hostile in court. Her mental health was questioned multiple times, but the jury didn't hesitate. She was sentenced to death, and over the years, she became the face of a debate. Was she a monster, or was she a damaged woman who had simply snapped? Aileen spent more than 10 years on death row in Florida, giving wild interviews and sometimes speaking like she was possessed by something greater than herself. On October 9th, 2002, she was executed by lethal injection. Her last words were as strange as her life had been. "I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus, June 6th. Like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." To this day, people argue about whether she was truly evil or just deeply broken. But one thing's clear: the way she killed without hesitation, without remorse, makes her one of the coldest women ever to walk into a courtroom. Christina Marie Riggs. State of execution, Arkansas. Execution date, May 2nd, 2000. Christina Marie Riggs was a licensed nurse and a mother of 2 young children, but what happened inside her home in 1997 was the kind of horror that left people speechless. She had been silently battling depression, carrying the weight of past trauma, failed relationships, and the crushing responsibilities of single motherhood. One night in Sherwood, Arkansas, that emotional storm reached its peak. Christina made the chilling decision to take not only her own life, but also the lives of her children, believing she was sparing them from future pain. She stole potassium chloride from her workplace, and ironically the same drug used in state executions, and injected it into her 5-year-old son, Justin, and her 2-year-old daughter, Shelby. When the drug didn't work as quickly as she thought, she smothered both children with her own hands. After killing them, Christina tried to follow through with her own suicide. She injected herself with potassium chloride and downed a cocktail of antidepressants, hoping she'd never wake up. But fate had other plans. When police arrived, they found her unconscious next to her lifeless children, one of the most haunting scenes investigators would ever describe. She had left suicide notes that painted a heartbreaking picture of her mental state. She felt like she had failed as a mother, that the world would only continue to bring her children suffering, and that death, in her mind, was a twisted act of mercy. For many, it was impossible to make sense of. Was this a woman lost to despair, or someone who made a brutal, conscious choice? Christina never denied what she had done. In court, she didn't play the victim or shift blame, but she owned every part of the crime and even asked the court to sentence her to death. She told her lawyers not to file any appeals. Her remorse didn't come in dramatic courtroom outbursts, but it came in the way she quietly accepted that she had crossed a line she could never return from. Prosecutors highlighted the planning involved, which were stealing hospital-grade drugs, writing out notes, putting the children to bed as if nothing was wrong. But even then, the public remained torn. Some people saw her as a cruel mother who robbed her kids of their futures. Others saw a deeply broken woman who had been failed by every support system around her. Christina Riggs was executed by lethal injection on May 2, 2000 in Arkansas. Her last words were filled with sorrow. "There is no way, no words to express how sorry I am." And perhaps that's what made her case stand out so much. Her story remains one of the most difficult to understand because it forces people to confront how thin the line can be between despair and destruction, between someone crying out for help and someone who becomes a danger to the very people they love most. Martha Place. State of execution, New York. Execution date, March the 20th, 1899. Martha Place's name might not ring loud today, but back in the late 1800s, her case made headlines for all the wrong reasons. She wasn't just another woman who committed murder, but she became the first woman to ever be executed in the electric chair in the United States. Born in 1849 in New Jersey, Martha's life had never been smooth. It's believed she suffered a serious head injury as a young girl, and some say she was never quite the same after that. As she got older, life didn't get any kinder. She married a man named William Place, a widower with a teenage daughter named Ida, and that marriage quickly soured. Martha grew intensely jealous of Ida, convinced her husband cared more for his daughter than for her. That resentment turned bitter and ugly over time, until it exploded into something truly dark. On February 7th, 1898, while William was away at work, Martha unleashed years of pent-up jealousy in the most horrifying way. She attacked 17-year-old Ida in cold blood. Reports say she threw acid in the girl's face, burning her skin and likely blinding her, then smothered her to death with a pillow. But that wasn't the end of it. When William came home and walked into the horror scene, Martha turned on him too. She struck him with an axe, leaving him seriously injured. Afterward, she tried to take her own life, but failed. When the police arrived, they found a bloodied Martha, lying in the mess she had created, surrounded by silence and death. The story quickly spread, and the details of the crime were so brutal, people struggled to wrap their heads around the fact that a woman could do such a thing. Her trial drew massive public attention. Back then, the idea of sentencing a woman to death, let alone in the electric chair, was controversial, even shocking. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury didn't need much time to reach their decision. Martha was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to die. Her lawyers tried to argue insanity and pointed to her old head injury, but no one was swayed. Appeals were made, and even the governor was petitioned for clemency, but the outcome never changed. When the day finally came on March 20th, 1899, Martha became the first woman to be executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. They had to make special arrangements to fit the equipment over her dress and hair. When the switch was flipped, history was made in the most chilling way. Looking back, Martha Place's case isn't just remembered for its firsts. It's remembered for how raw and disturbing it was. This wasn't a crime of desperation. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment robbery or a violent reaction to abuse. This was jealousy turned to hate, planned and carried out against a defenseless teenage girl who posed no real threat other than being loved. Martha didn't try to escape or hide, but she sat in her rage and acted on it. And for that, she etched her name permanently in the darkest part of U.S. criminal history. Sue Logue, State of Execution, South Carolina. Execution date, January 15, 1943. Sue Logue's story is the kind that sticks with you, not just because of the crime itself, but because of how deeply twisted and dramatic everything around it became. She wasn't some career criminal or lifelong troublemaker. She was a former school teacher from a well-respected family in rural South Carolina, but under the surface there was pride, power, and a thirst for revenge brewing. The whole thing started with a land dispute of all things. Sue and her husband got into a heated argument with a neighbor named Davis Timmerman over something as petty as a calf wandering onto someone else's land. It should have ended with a few angry words or a fine. Instead, it turned into a full-blown murder plot. Sue may not have pulled the trigger herself, but she was the driving force behind the scenes. Authorities believed she pushed her husband, Wallace Logue, and their close friend, George McLeod, to take matters into their own hands. In September 1941, Davis Timmerman was ambushed and killed, and it didn't stop there. When the murder investigation led to court, things got even darker. One of Sue's own relatives, Thomas W. Timmerman, marched into the courthouse and shot Judge Ramage. Yes, a sitting judge dead in broad daylight. That moment turned a local murder case into a statewide scandal. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It became a Southern blood feud unfolding right in front of everyone, with guns, lies, and revenge on full display. The trial that followed was intense. Everyone had eyes on Sue. She stood there, this petite, composed woman, facing down accusations that she'd orchestrated one of the most dramatic revenge killings South Carolina had ever seen. The jury didn't need her to confess. They saw through the denials and polite smiles. In the end, Sue was convicted for her role in the conspiracy, and the state made its decision. On January 15, 1943, she became the first woman ever executed in South Carolina's electric chair. It was a grim milestone carried out at Central Correctional Institution in Columbia. And in true Southern Gothic fashion, it wasn't quiet or clean, but it was the end of a violent saga that had started with pride and ended in tragedy. Sue Logue was controlled, calculated, and deeply invested in upholding her family's honor, no matter who had to die for it. Her case is still brought up when people talk about the deadliest women in American crime history. She wasn't feared because she killed with her own hands. She was feared because she convinced others to do it, all while maintaining a cold, unwavering stare that said, "I did what had to be done." That's a different kind of evil altogether. Betty Lou Beets. State of Execution, Texas. Execution date, February 24, 2000. Betty Lou Beets didn't look like someone you'd fear at first glance. In fact, to the outside world, she came off as a frail older woman with white hair and soft features, someone you'd expect to see handing out cookies at church socials. But behind that gentle exterior was a deeply manipulative woman who made deadly decisions with the ease of flipping a light switch. Over the years, Betty racked up 6 marriages to 5 different men, and as the relationships soured, the men mysteriously vanished or ended up dead. The most horrifying chapter of her life unfolded in the early 80s. In 1983, Betty reported her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, missing, claiming he went out fishing and never came back. Authorities initially thought it was a tragic boating accident, as his empty boat was found on Lake Athens, and the search didn't turn up much. But it wouldn't be until 2 years later, during a search of her property, that police made a gruesome discovery. Jimmy's body was found buried in a flower bed and right beside him. The remains of Doyle Wayne Barker, her fourth husband, who had been missing since 1981. Betty had turned her own yard into a burial ground, hiding her crimes right beneath people's feet. She even had a fake wishing well built over Jimmy's grave to keep suspicions away. And it didn't stop there. Her own son testified that Betty had enlisted him to help hide Jimmy's body, dragging her family into the mess she created. Prosecutors said the motive was simple: money. She wanted to cash in on life insurance policies and collect pension benefits. Betty's defense tried to argue that she was a long-time victim of domestic abuse, using that angle to justify the killings. But the evidence didn't add up, as there were no signs these men were threatening her at the time of their deaths, and the cold, calculated manner in which she orchestrated the burials made it clear this wasn't about fear. It was about control, about eliminating the men she no longer needed. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection in Huntsville, Texas. She didn't give a final statement. No apology, no remorse, just silence. Her last meal was oddly simple for someone whose life was so layered in secrets. A salad with ranch dressing, a banana, and iced tea. That was it. Betty's execution left a lasting stain on Texas prison history, not because she was the first or the most prolific, but because of how matter-of-fact she was about murder. No panic, no visible guilt, just a backyard full of secrets and a trail of dead husbands behind her. She reminded everyone that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you'd never expect. Karla Faye Tucker. State of execution, Texas. Execution date, February 3rd, 1998. Karla Faye Tucker wasn't just infamous for her crime, she became a national sensation for how drastically her life seemed to change while sitting on death row. But before the talk shows and appeals, before the pleas for mercy and the Bible in her hand, Karla's name was tied to something far darker. On June 13, 1983, she and her boyfriend, Daniel Garrett, broke into the Houston apartment of Jerry Lynn Dean, intending to steal his motorcycle parts. When Jerry awoke during the burglary, what followed was a brutal double murder that still sends chills down the spine of anyone who hears it. Karla attacked Jerry with a pickaxe, yes, a literal pickaxe, and then turned the same weapon on Deborah Thornton, a woman who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. What disturbed people most was how she described the killing later. She said she had an orgasm with every blow. That statement, played over and over again in court and in media, seared itself into the public's memory. It painted a portrait of a woman killed with a kind of twisted ecstasy. The crime scene was horrifying, as both victims were brutally hacked, and the sheer savagery of the attack left no room for ambiguity. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime, it was vicious, and it immediately put Karla at the top of Texas's most wanted list for capital punishment. But by the time her execution neared in the late 90s, Karla was no longer the same woman who had swung that pickaxe. She had become a devout Christian, openly repentant, and remarkably articulate about the transformation she experienced in prison. Her change sparked a nationwide debate about redemption, punishment, and whether a woman who had found God deserved to die. Celebrities, religious leaders, and even some members of the public rallied around her, begging the state to spare her life. But the courts weren't moved. The law didn't forget what she had done, and neither did the families of her victims. On February 3, 1998, Karla Faye Tucker was executed by lethal injection, becoming the first woman put to death in Texas since 1863. She was 38 years old. Her final words were a prayer. She looked toward her victim's family, apologized, and said, "I am going to be face to face with Jesus now." Her last meal request was a typical prison tray, as she declined a special meal. But regardless of the change she claimed, the horror she inflicted with that pickaxe never disappeared, and for many, it defined her legacy forever. Frances Newton. State of execution: Texas. Execution date: September 14, 2005. Frances Newton's case shook the state of Texas because it blended two deeply uncomfortable themes: family murder and doubt. On April 7, 1987, Newton's husband, Adrian, their 7-year-old son, Alton, and their 20-month-old daughter, Farah, were all found shot to death in their Houston apartment. Each had been killed with a .25 caliber pistol, and the scene was so devastating that it left seasoned officers in disbelief. The quietness of the home, the little children lifeless on the floor. It didn't look like a robbery gone wrong or an outside invasion. And pretty quickly, suspicions turned toward Frances, the one surviving family member who, just weeks before, had taken out $50,000 life insurance policies on her husband and children. What made the case darker was the cold precision of it. Frances claimed at first that her husband was involved in drugs and that maybe someone he was dealing with had taken revenge. But investigators found no evidence of such activity. Instead, what they did find was the murder weapon, a gun purchased by a man she was dating at the time, hidden in a relative's home, reportedly at Frances's instruction. The timeline, the motive, and the insurance policies all pointed in one direction. The jury took just 6 hours to find her guilty of capital murder, and despite her pleas of innocence, prosecutors painted her as a calculated killer who had traded the lives of her family for a payout. As the years passed and her execution date drew closer, the case became a magnet for controversy. Supporters raised concerns about the quality of her legal representation during trial and the lack of forensic testing on key pieces of evidence. Some activists and legal experts felt the evidence was circumstantial and that too much doubt lingered around the actual shooter. Even a member of the parole board called for a delay, and then Governor Rick Perry granted a temporary reprieve in 2004 to allow for further review. But ultimately, the courts stood by the original verdict. Frances never confessed, and she maintained her innocence until the very end. On September 14, 2005, Frances Newton was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. She became the first black woman to be executed in Texas since the Civil War era. Like Beets before her, Newton made no final statement and did not have a last meal request. Whether Frances was a cold-blooded killer or a wrongfully convicted mother, her story remains one of the most haunting and debated executions in modern U.S. history. Lisa Montgomery. State of execution: Indiana, federal. Execution date: January 13, 2021. Lisa Montgomery's crime wasn't just evil, it was deeply unsettling on every level. On December 16, 2004, Montgomery drove from her home in Kansas to the small town of Skidmore, Missouri, under the guise of purchasing a puppy from 23-year-old Bobby Jo Stinnett, a pregnant dog breeder she had met online. The two had exchanged emails through a rat terrier enthusiast group, and Bobby Jo, 8 months pregnant at the time, had no idea that her friendly dog-loving contact had sinister intentions. When Montgomery arrived at the home, she strangled Bobby Jo to death with a rope, then, in a shocking twist, used a kitchen knife to cut the baby from her womb and flee with the infant as if it were her own. The brutality of the crime stunned the country. Bobby Jo's mother found her daughter in a pool of blood just an hour later, and a frantic search for the baby began. Within 24 hours, the FBI tracked Montgomery to her home in Melbourne, Kansas, where she was found calmly holding the newborn girl, later named Victoria Jo, claiming she had just given birth. But the timeline didn't add up, and soon investigators pieced together a horrific truth. Lisa had faked her pregnancy, deceived her family and friends, and planned the abduction murder as a twisted way to replace the baby she couldn't carry herself. During her trial, Montgomery's defense team argued that she suffered from severe mental illness, rooted in a childhood filled with horrific sexual abuse, trauma, and dissociation. Her supporters, including mental health advocates, claimed she wasn't sane at the time of the murder, but prosecutors countered that she had planned the crime meticulously, researching how to perform a C-section, bringing surgical tools, and crafting an elaborate lie. A jury ultimately found her guilty of federal kidnapping, resulting in death, and she was sentenced to death in 2007. After years of appeals, stays, and legal debate, Lisa Montgomery was executed by lethal injection on January 13, 2021, at the Federal Medical Center in Terre Haute, Indiana. She was the first woman executed by the federal government in nearly 70 years. Her final words were a simple no when asked if she had any last statement. Her last meal reportedly included chicken and noodles. While some view her execution as long overdue justice for the sheer horror she inflicted, others see it as a tragic failure of the system to protect and treat the severely mentally ill. Either way, Lisa Montgomery's name now sits firmly in the grim legacy of America's most evil women. Martha Beck. State of execution, New York. Execution date, March 8, 1951. Martha Beck's name is forever tied to one of the most twisted love stories in American crime history. Born in 1920 in Florida, Martha led a troubled life. She was overweight, deeply insecure, and suffered from a glandular condition that made her feel unattractive and unloved. After a series of failed relationships and giving birth to 2 children out of wedlock, she sank into loneliness and desperation. Then, in 1947, everything changed when she answered a Lonely Hearts ad and met Raymond Fernandez, a charming con man with a history of seducing women for their money. The two hit it off instantly, forming a toxic and deadly bond. Together they would become infamously known as the Lonely Hearts Killers. Their twisted operation involved Martha posing as Fernandez's sister, while he courted lonely women, swindled them, and in some cases, killed them. At first, it was about money, but soon it turned into bloodshed. Martha, driven by possessiveness and jealousy, couldn't stand seeing Raymond with other women, even when it was part of their scheme. In 1949, the couple committed their most notorious murders: Delphine Downing and her 2-year-old daughter, Raynell, in Michigan. After drugging Delphine, Martha grew paranoid that the woman would recover and tell police, so she shot her in the head. Then, disturbingly, she and Raymond drowned the toddler in a bathtub to eliminate witnesses. It was a chilling crime that finally led to their arrest. Their confessions were as callous as their crimes. Once in custody, Martha and Raymond confessed to killing at least 3 people, possibly more between 1947 and 1949. Martha showed little remorse, often insisting that her love for Raymond justified everything. "I'd kill for him again," she once said. Their trial was highly publicized, with reporters dubbing them America's sweetheart psychopaths. The two sat side by side, making jokes and exchanging loving glances, even as witnesses described their horrifying acts. Ultimately, their charm didn't fool the jury. Both were convicted of first-degree murder in New York, and the judge sentenced them to die in the electric chair. On March 8, 1951, Martha Beck was executed at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York, just minutes after Raymond. She was 31 years old. Her final meal is not well documented, and she offered no last words before her execution. Martha Beck wasn't just evil because of what she did. She was terrifying because of how fully she embraced it in the name of love. Mary Surratt, State of Execution, Washington, D.C., Federal. Execution date, July the 7th, 1865. Born in 1823 in Maryland, Mary was a devout Catholic, a widowed mother of 3, and by all accounts, a respectable woman trying to rebuild her life after her husband's death. She converted their family tavern into a boarding house and later moved to Washington, D.C., where she opened a second one. But that second home would change everything. During the chaos of the Civil War's final days, Mary's boarding house became a quiet gathering place for Confederate supporters, one of whom was John Wilkes Booth, the man who would assassinate President Abraham Lincoln. That connection alone would be enough to ruin her, but prosecutors believed it went deeper. After Lincoln was murdered in April 1865, authorities moved quickly, desperate to bring down everyone involved. Mary was arrested and accused of being a key player in the plot, specifically of helping Booth and his men with resources and safe spaces. The government claimed she delivered field glasses to Booth before the assassination, and that weapons were hidden at her family tavern in Surrattsville under her watch. Her boarding house, they argued, wasn't just a place to rest, it was the war room. But Mary's defense maintained that she was a widow, caught in the crossfire of a conspiracy she neither approved of nor understood. Her son, John Surratt, was also implicated, but he fled the country and managed to avoid execution. Mary wasn't so fortunate. What made her trial even more controversial was the fact that it wasn't held in a regular courtroom. Mary was tried before a military tribunal, something usually reserved for wartime enemies, not civilians. The tribunal convicted her swiftly, and even though 5 members recommended mercy because of her age and gender, President Andrew Johnson didn't budge. He saw her as part of the plot that took the life of the president, and in the heat of national mourning, sympathy was in short supply. So despite the lingering doubts and calls for clemency, the sentence was carried out. On July 7, 1865, Mary Surratt became the first woman executed by the U.S. federal government. She stood quietly in a long black dress, her head covered with a veil, and as the noose tightened, she softly pleaded, "Please don't let me fall." Minutes later, her body dropped from the gallows alongside 3 other conspirators. Her death has haunted historians for generations. Was she truly guilty or simply a scapegoat in a national tragedy that demanded quick justice? Whether you see her as a cold-blooded traitor or a woman wrongfully executed, Mary Surratt's case remains one of the most emotionally charged and debated executions in American history. Ruth Snyder, State of Execution, New York. Execution date, January 12, 1928. Ruth Snyder's name will forever be tied to one of the most cold-blooded and sensational crimes in 1920s America, a crime so twisted that it shook New York to its core. Born in Queens, New York in 1895, Ruth was a housewife stuck in what she described as a loveless marriage to Albert Snyder, an art editor at a magazine. She claimed Albert was controlling and emotionally cold, still obsessed with a former fiancé who had died years earlier. Ruth, feeling trapped and desperate, began an affair with a corset salesman named Henry Judd Gray. As the affair deepened, she started fantasizing about life without her husband and with a $48,000 life insurance payout, thanks to a policy she had secretly forged under his name. That twisted dream soon turned deadly. On March 20th, 1927, Ruth and Judd Gray acted on their deadly plan. With Ruth's help, Judd entered the Snyder home while Albert was asleep. Together, they bludgeoned him with a window sash weight, garroted him with wire, and staged the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. But their cover-up fell apart fast. Investigators immediately noticed inconsistencies in Ruth's story and found no signs of forced entry. Suspicion turned into arrest when Ruth's behavior became erratic, and Judd, in a panic, confessed everything. What followed was one of the most scandalous trials of the decade, a trial that gripped the public like a true crime novel brought to life. During their joint trial, the lovers turned on each other. Ruth painted Judd as the mastermind, while Judd described Ruth as manipulative and cold, accusing her of coercing him into murder. The jury didn't buy the deflection from either side. In May 1927, both were convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The press had a field day. Ruth was vilified in newspapers across the country, depicted as the ultimate femme fatale. The media's obsession with her looks and her role as a mother added another layer of public outrage. She wasn't just a killer, she was a wife and mom who plotted her husband's brutal murder in cold blood, and people couldn't look away. Ruth Snyder was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison on January 12, 1928. In a moment that remains infamous to this day, a hidden camera smuggled in by a reporter captured her final moments. An image of her in the electric chair was plastered across front pages the next morning. That morbid photo became one of the most iconic crime images in American history. To this day, Ruth Snyder is remembered not only for her cold-hearted crime, but also as the first woman executed in New York since the 19th century. Eva Dugan. State of execution, Arizona. Execution date, February 21st, 1930. Eva Dugan's story is infamous for the unforgettable horror of how her execution unfolded. Born in Missouri in 1878, Eva lived a chaotic life of short-term marriages, fast relocations, and sketchy hustles. By the 1920s, she had landed in Pima County, Arizona, where she worked as a housekeeper for a reclusive chicken rancher named Andrew J. Mathis. Eva wasn't the kind of woman to quietly clean a home. She was loud, bold, and full of survival instincts. But things turned sour when Mathis suddenly disappeared in 1927. With Eva gone and his truck mysteriously sold by her, the townspeople became suspicious. It didn't take long for police to connect the dots and arrest her in New York. At first, Eva claimed Mathis had gone on a trip and left her the truck. But when his badly decomposed body was found buried in a shallow grave on his property with signs of blunt force trauma, her story fell apart. Facing intense pressure, Eva finally admitted to forging his checks and pawning off his possessions, but she insisted she didn't kill him. The jury wasn't convinced. In 1927, she was convicted of first-degree murder. Her trial caught attention for her wild behavior, singing, laughing, even flirting with jailers. She wasn't afraid to show her personality, even with a death sentence hanging over her head. Her case drew headlines, but nothing prepared the public for what came next. Eva Dugan was sentenced to death by hanging, becoming the first and only woman to be executed in Arizona's gas chamber predecessor. On February 21, 1930, the execution took place at Arizona State Prison in Florence, but the process went horribly wrong. When the trapdoor opened and Eva dropped, the force was too much and her head was completely severed from her body. The gruesome scene caused several witnesses to faint, and the botched hanging caused such an uproar that Arizona swiftly retired hanging as a method of execution. Eva's death literally changed the way the state carried out capital punishment. Even in her final days, Eva remained defiant. She reportedly quipped to prison staff, "Well, I'll die with my boots on." And she did, boots, attitude, and all. Her crime may have been buried under the scandal of her decapitation, but her legacy lives on as one of the most chilling and bizarre executions in American history. Ava Dugan wasn't just remembered for the life she took, she was remembered for how brutally her own life ended. Anna Hahn. State of execution, Ohio. Execution date, December 7, 1938. Anna Marie Hahn was born in Bavaria, Germany, in the year 1906, but by the time she was in her late 20s, she had earned a deadly reputation in Cincinnati, Ohio. After arriving in the United States in the 1920s, she lived with her family in the city's German-speaking community. At first glance, she appeared to be a devoted wife and mother, but beneath that image was a woman consumed by greed and deception. She targeted elderly German men who were lonely, vulnerable, and often without close relatives. Posing as a caregiver or helper, Anna quickly gained their trust, moved into their homes, and took control of their finances. Between 1932 and 1937, a disturbing pattern emerged. One by one, several of the elderly men she lived with began dying. Some suddenly, others after brief, painful illnesses. Suspicion grew when doctors began noticing strange symptoms in the victims, including convulsions and rapid decline. The death of George Obendorfer, one of her final victims, triggered a full investigation. When arsenic was found in his system, the police took a closer look at Anna. Digging into her past uncovered multiple suspicious deaths and forged documents. She had been collecting thousands of dollars from these men while poisoning them slowly and systematically. In 1937, Anna Hahn stood trial for the murder of Obendorfer. The case drew national media attention. It was rare to see a woman, especially a mother, on trial for serial poisoning. The prosecution painted a chilling picture, a woman who used kindness as a mask for murder and whose motive was pure greed. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. Her appeals were denied, and the public followed every step of her journey to the electric chair. Despite attempts to portray her as mentally ill or misguided, her manipulative methods and the pattern of her crimes spoke louder than any defense. Anna Hahn was executed on December 7, 1938, in the electric chair at the Ohio Penitentiary. She became the first woman to be executed by the state of Ohio, and her case went down as one of the most sensational of its time. In her final moments, she reportedly collapsed and had to be carried to the chair, sobbing and reciting prayers. Her legacy remains as one of the coldest and calculated female killers in U.S. history, a woman who used poison and persuasion in equal measure to destroy lives. Sarah Jane Whiteling. State of execution, Pennsylvania. Execution date, June 25, 1889. Sarah Jane Whiteling wasn't the kind of woman most people feared at first glance. Living in Philadelphia in the late 1800s, she blended into the working-class neighborhoods with little fanfare. But in 1888, the city would learn that Sarah, the calm, reserved, and quiet woman, was harboring something much darker beneath her modest appearance. Over the course of several months, Sarah poisoned her own husband, her 9-year-old daughter, and her young son using arsenic. At first, she claimed each death was the result of illness. But when her third family member died under similarly mysterious circumstances, even the most trusting neighbors began asking questions. Suspicion turned into action when authorities exhumed the bodies and found lethal amounts of arsenic in each of them. When confronted, Sarah eventually confessed, but her reasons were chilling. She claimed that poverty and the fear of her children falling into a life of sin had pushed her to kill. She justified her actions by saying it was better to send her loved ones to heaven than watch them suffer on earth. These twisted beliefs shocked the public, especially as newspapers began portraying her as both a cold-blooded killer and a religious fanatic who masked murder with morality. Her trial in 1889 gripped the nation. In court, Sarah appeared emotionless, rarely showing remorse. Her defense argued insanity, citing religious delusions and psychological imbalance. But the jury wasn't swayed. The facts were clear. This was a woman who had purchased poison, calculated her actions, and watched her family die one by one. On March 25, 1889, Sarah Jane Whiteling was convicted of first-degree murder. Her conviction made headlines as she became the first woman ever to be sentenced to death and executed in Philadelphia. Sarah was hanged on June 25, 1889 in Pennsylvania, becoming one of the few women executed in the U.S. during the 19th century. Her story haunts true crime historians to this day, not because she was outwardly monstrous, but because she weaponized maternal love as a justification for murder. She didn't kill out of rage or revenge. She did it out of a twisted sense of salvation. Teresa Lewis. State of execution, Virginia. Execution date, September 23, 2010. Teresa Lewis's name became one of the most debated in Virginia's criminal history, not just because of her crime, but because of who she was and how her case played out in the national spotlight. Born in 1969, Teresa was a struggling mother in Pittsylvania County, Virginia, with a low IQ, a turbulent background, and a growing dependency on prescription drugs. But what lay beneath that troubled surface was a calculating mind capable of cold betrayal. In 2002, she conspired to have her husband, Julian Lewis, and his son, Charles, murdered for a $250,000 life insurance payout. The plan wasn't complicated, but it was deadly. Teresa began an affair with a much younger man, Matthew Schallenberger, and together they plotted the murder. On the night of October 30, 2002, Teresa left the door unlocked for Schallenberger and another accomplice. The two men entered the home and shot Julian and Charles execution style while they were sleeping. Teresa waited in the hallway, never lifting a finger to stop the carnage. When police arrived, she pretended to be a grieving wife. But the story quickly unraveled. During the investigation, it was revealed that Teresa had gone on a shopping spree just days after the murders, and phone records, love letters, and confessions made it clear she had orchestrated the plan. What shocked the public was her lack of remorse and the manipulation of younger men to carry out her deadly wishes. Prosecutors argued that despite her below-average IQ, she had taken deliberate and calculated steps to ensure both men were killed. In 2003, she pleaded guilty and was sentenced to death, the first woman in Virginia to receive the death penalty in nearly a century. On September 23, 2010, at Greensville Correctional Center in Jarrett, Virginia, Teresa Lewis was executed by lethal injection. Her case drew attention from across the globe, with even the president of Iran at the time calling for clemency. Advocates questioned whether someone with her cognitive limitations should be put to death, while others insisted justice had been served for the brutal betrayal of family. Her final meal included fried chicken, peas with butter, and apple pie. Her last words were directed toward her family: "I just want everybody to know that I love you." Teresa Lewis left behind a legacy filled with pain, controversy, and a moral debate that still lingers. From jealous lovers to heartless masterminds, these women shattered every stereotype about who's capable of pure evil. Their crimes weren't deeds of passion, but they were cold, calculated, and devastating. The justice system didn't hesitate, and in each case, the death penalty marked the final chapter of stories soaked in betrayal, greed, and blood. But even in their final moments, some showed remorse, others didn't flinch. Some asked for forgiveness, others met the end with a smirk. Stay tuned for more stories that pull back the curtain on true crime's most unsettling figures. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more shocking tales from America's darkest cells.